We are a research and a publishing platform that is interested in cities, urban development, innovation, and citizenship. And I will tell you today a little bit about what we do, but also how we came to do what we do, and how do we understand the title Amateur Cities, how it defines what we do. And hopefully this will also make a little bit of a link of what interests us in terms of research that we're trying to conduct. So first I would like to introduce us as Amateur Cities. I'm just a half of it. My name is Ania. The other half is Cristina Ampatido. We are both architects and urbanists, and both female. We are based in Holland, but actually none of us is Dutch. I'm Polish and she's Greek. But we met as students there, and somewhere on our way we started practicing architecture, but also doing lots of other things related to publishing, research, art, and all sorts of other things. And that's how Amateur Cities started, and that's also what defines it. So as diverse as our interests and practices are, also the platforms is. So yes, we are an online publishing platform, but we not only publish articles on cities, architecture, and all of the disciplines that are related to it online, but we also, so this is us, and yeah, this is how diversely we work. So we are not only online, but we're also working with publications, with research. We occasionally do exhibitions and workshops. So we try to find different forms to get that activity going. And first, I would like to explain to you where did the title Amateur Cities come from. And I want to start a little bit in a maybe an obvious way with a story of someone who I'm sure you've heard of. It's Michael Faraday. I bet everybody had something to do with him in the physics class at school, because it's the person that is probably the biggest authority that we have nowadays in electromagnetism. But the way that he came to this was not because he was educated as a physicist, or he was also doing a lot of inventions in chemistry, and he was also not a chemist. He actually started his career in a bookbinding shop where he got an apprenticeship very young in his life. But while he was binding books, he got interested in the content of these books, and he actually started reading them and started asking questions and discovering things. And eventually what it led to is that a lot of his inventions define what we nowadays take for granted, such as the electric motor, for instance. And he had absolutely no or very little formal education to get there. And that's what we understand as the true amateur. And that might sound a little bit confusing, because I think most of you think of an amateur as someone who is maybe not good enough in what they do. But actually amateur, the word amateur comes from the Latin verb amare, which means to love, which means that the amateur is somebody who truly loves what they do. They do it out of passion and fascination for something, and this is what Faraday did with his invention or inventions. And we think it's very unfair to talk about amateurs as people who are just not good enough in something, because there were a lot of other amateurs who we now consider the biggest authorities in certain disciplines, So the first one is Charles Darwin, the second one is Thomas Edison, and the third one here is Gregor Mendel. I don't think that anyone would say that they didn't know enough about what they were doing just because they didn't get enough education in that field. And that's people who we also consider true amateurs. And so that's the first part of our title. The second one has to do with cities. And how do we connect amateurs to cities? Is exactly because we think that cities are not something that should be left to the experts. And to explain that, I want to bring up a short anecdote that happened between me and a friend of mine during this project that we're now creating, that I'm going to tell you about later. I asked her to fill out a simple questionnaire where we ask for words that we use when we talk about cities, and words that concern us within certain topics, such as relationship between cities and nature, or how do we live all together, or how does technology influence our daily lives. And I meant words such as participation, resilience, as privatization of public space, things that we all hear every day and we're all aware of it. And she's an architect and also works as a designer and sometimes does stuff that is related to IT. So she has a very broad field of expertise, and her answer was, you know, but this is not my field of expertise, so I don't know how to answer this question. And that made me think that, it made me actually very worried, because if such an educated person feels that cities are not her field of expertise, there is something deeply problematic about it, because what we think is that it's our common field of expertise, because cities are places where most of the population lives now. And in some cities, it's more striking, and some countries, it's more striking than in the others. But in general, it's a growing tendency, and it should be our common concern to be able to talk about it. And it seems almost obvious if we relate to what sociologist Robert Park said while defining what a city is. We created cities in the first place to improve our living environment because we wanted something slightly better than a cave. And then it went on and on and on, and we kept on making them better because we believed that there is, you know, a more pleasant, a more effective, and a more human-friendly way to actually inhabit the earth. That may seem paradoxical because now sometimes cities are actually not seen that way, but that was why we created them in the first place, and that's also how they started to redefine us. And that's how we connect amateurism and cities, because we think that we should have a deeper connection with the environment where we live, and we should understand what is going on in these places, and we should have the feeling that we can understand and influence what is happening there. This is Rotterdam, a city where both me and Christina live at the moment. But on the other hand, what we see more and more nowadays is not that cities are seen as places that we love. They're more seen as places that have to be managed and controlled, that they're full of problems, full of crime, homelessness, and we see this management more as a matter of efficiency, as a matter of a control center, as this one in Rio de Janeiro, where everything is mapped, monitored, tracked, and it almost creates us this illusion that if we can gather enough information about what is happening in real time, we can find solutions to all of the problems that happen in the city. But as this manifestation of that approach, which is London Dashboard, that displays an amount of data gathered about the city, it's actually just an illusion, because the fact that we see what is happening in the city right now does not mean that we can solve all of its problems, and we only bring the problems down to a level of technical or technocratic management. And this is something that has been theoretically defined as a shift that is happening from government to governance, and where government is something that you can understand as a more political approach to defining space, and governance is understood as something more technical or technocratic. And here are the different levels on which it happens. So on one hand is that the governments, the actual political governments of nation states are being rescaled, and policies are being reoriented more from redistribution to competition. So like you see it a lot in city rankings, you know, like who is a better city is going to get more. But also it goes a bit to a different level, the last level, where more multinational corporations and different bigger organizations such as World Trade Bank and so on start to decide on things that are actually very important to us. So for instance, they decide what is the future of our food, where the seeds are going to come from, are they going to be modified or not. We have not so much, or our national governments also have not so much to say about it. But also, you know, what happens to our privacy, where all of the data about what we do is being collected, which we have seen a lot in the discussions going on around ACTA and currently TTIP. This is something that is not happening on the level of citizenship, and also not on the level of the national government, but on a higher level of organizations such as formerly G8, for instance. And the reaction to this is that a lot of people feel that if they cannot expect much from the government, maybe they should start doing things themselves and taking the matters in their own hands. So we see a lot of emerging communities that actually start to do what we previously would expect from governments to do. And while it might be good in the case of taking care of communal gardens and small public spaces, I would question if this is the right way to go, as in this example of Cairo, where people actually built a highway exit because there was none and they needed one. And this is the moment where, on one hand, when we see that the bottom-up is emerging as a counterbalance to the top-down, and the DIY, so do-it-yourself practices, are being on the rise. And on one hand, this is good because people are becoming more conscious and more engaged in their living environment. But also, we have to ask ourselves sometimes, you know, I don't know if this meme was as popular in Ukraine as it is in Poland and other places, but you know, the situation where you go to McDonald's and you're always asked, would you also like fries with your meals? That becomes a metaphor for, you know, when somebody is asking you a lot, would you also like fries with it? So like, it's a way to indicate that maybe you're asking too much, and that's something that we should maybe remember to also ask to our governments. Are they not asking us too much when they're shifting the whole responsibility of praising participation? Okay, you're great, you're ingenious, you can do everything yourself, and it starts with the community garden, then there is highway exit, education, healthcare, and so on. And what are then the governments going to do if we're going to do ourselves? And is this also the direction that we want to go? Because that's not really something that we were thinking of where we decided that democracy was kind of the best system that we could figure out so far. And speaking of democracy, that is another problem that more of us start to feel that maybe there is something wrong with democracy, maybe it doesn't work. We start to disbelieve that it really is a good system. And this is when we as citizens become disinterested in what is going on. We think that, well, maybe we cannot really do much, our opinion doesn't matter, and we become disenfranchised. And the less we can decide on what the places where we're going to live will look like. And the more important part is that while we become disinterested, we're starting to lose rights to actually decide what this space is going to be like. And there's a lot of people who research that. One of them is Saskia Sassen, who actually in an anecdotal situation with her husband, who was complaining that she doesn't have a hobby, decided to find herself a hobby and start counting rights that citizens across different countries are losing every day, which is both funny and scary, because that means that this is a large enough of a task that could constitute her hobby. And that should make us think of the situation where we maybe disbelief in the government, we maybe shift away a lot of decision-making tasks, such as the ones that were previously the domain of urban planners, into the hands of the technocrats, who will be there after all to protect our rights as citizens, and who will in the end decide about these things. And that brings me to back to amateur cities, and where we see our role as a part of the media. So we're not exactly journalists, but we do create media in the domain of architecture and how we connect it also to citizenship. So we think that in this time and in this context, it's very important to have strong, independent, quality media that help create understanding of what is going on. And as we can see in this little cartoon, it's always a threat to those who make decisions and maybe do things that shouldn't be done if they are being observed, and then if they have quality media on their backs. Because we have background in architecture and that's our main interest, we look into our own backyard of architectural media that we think sadly are dominated by platforms that I'm sure you know, like ArcDaily and Dezeen, and they're all great because they help us to see what is happening. But in the end, what these platforms do, they reprint largely. They've also changed in recent years a little bit, but they largely reprint press releases. So they don't actually participate in opinion making or helping us to understand what is going on. They just are a platform to communicate what the architects wanted to say and how they wanted to build a beautiful image of the work that they have just produced. And it happens also to the biggest giants that we consider as independent and quality, such as the Architectural Review. And then on the other hand, we have this big gathering of beautiful images that we love to flip through. But what kind of connection do they have with reality if we see floating people, flying butterflies, and waterfalls? What does that contribute to our ability to understand the spaces that are going to be created? Because all of us know this is not going to happen, and it's not going to look the same way as in the image. And in a way, it brings us further away to be able to criticize the actual project or to discuss how it's going to look in real life. But then when we look on the other side of the spectrum, we have the academia, and that looks like this, and it's not better. It's hermetic, it's hard to find, it's hard to understand, and it's full of brilliant thought, but it's very inaccessible. And these two worlds, they don't talk to each other, and they're very disconnected, and that's where we are trying to find a place for ourselves. So we try to be something in between. On one hand, we're trying to show people what's going on, but on the other hand, we want to make it more contentful as the academia, but using the language that is also understandable as the language of the architectural rendering. And when we started Amateur Cities, that was 1.5, almost 2 years ago, that was shortly after this new online media platform started in Holland called The Correspondent. And what they said was really important to us, because they said, we don't want to produce news, we want to create insight. And that was a word that really motivated us, and we said, hey, this is actually what we miss in architectural media. We miss insight, we miss the ability to understand actually what does that mean, and how the relationship between architecture and economy and ecology actually form our understanding of the city. And that defined also the process in which we work. We said, like, hey, so we want to have these insightful and very readable articles, but how do we do that? And we want it to be much faster than the academia, but in reality, it's not really that easy, because we take a very long editing process, making sure that if we work with academics, for instance, that publish with us, we have to nag them every now and again to rephrase, to explain what they mean, because they use very closed professional jargon that they think everybody understands in their field. But if somebody who is a doctor, let's say, reads that article, they will have absolutely no clue what they're talking about. So that takes a lot of time and effort to actually create a language that is understandable for everyone. And we have 3 different sections through which we do that, which are also a bit the 3 different things that we want to give focus to. And the 2 most important ones are critical imaginations and the Unmastered, where critical imagination is the place for essay and critical thinking, and where we invite people who often already write, but maybe write in an academic context and not more journalistic and open context. And the Unmastered is precisely the other side of the spectrum. It's the practitioners that make stuff, but they don't really write, or they don't even care to publish. And there we give the voice to them through a series of interviews, so that their voice can also be heard. And that's how on the side of the media, how we try to realize our slogan of connecting city thinkers to city makers. And then the third one is what we call wishful thinking, where we don't want to undermine the power of the image, where we publish visual triggers that are imaginative, that can ask questions about our environment and how can we relate to it today or in the future. And we work with a broad number of contributors that come from very different fields, and they're not only architects, but we are always really open to contributions from anyone, no matter which field you're in. Also, if you're a taxi driver, you're very welcome to write at Amateur Cities. So also, if any of you would have an idea, please drop us a message, and you're also welcome to be a part of the platform. And I just quickly want to give you some idea of the content that we've published so far. So this is, for instance, a part of the wishful thinking platform, where we published an actual image. So this is not a collage. This is a place nearby city where I come from in Poland, where actually somebody decided to protect cyclists from agriculture. It's not very clear why, but we thought it was very interesting to, based on that picture, think of, you know, how the city claims its space through control. And it's outside of the city, but because of these barriers, it's almost as if, you know, this space is claimed by the city just to claim it as a part of its own domain, but also it makes us reflect on how we define safety in the city. Is this really necessary to protect ourselves from each other in a way when we stop thinking because everything is controlled? This is an example of a long critical essay. I'm not going to go in depth of like what is saying, but it's written by a guy who's Brett Scott, who's a financial activist, but he has a deep interest in cities, and he wrote for us about this connection between city and nature, where we actually become very connected globally through internet, through everything that is happening and through all of these digital interfaces, but we completely lose connection with our physical environment and moreover what is outside of the physical environment of the city with the natural environment. This is another article by an art educator, Max Haven, who explained the different dimensions of financialization and how it manifests itself in the space of the city. And again, I'm not going to explain exactly what the article is about. It's just to give you an idea about the kind of topics. And what Max was writing about, I think, connects very well to another wishful thinking contribution that we had from Dylan Marsh, who is a photographer and who makes all of these different speculations about how we define value. And so he took photos of places of resource extraction, in this case copper, and then compared it with the actual size of what is extracted. And it made us think of, you know, how would it affect our behavior if we were confronted with this information every day on everything we buy, if we could know what it takes to actually produce all of these things and where they come from. Would it affect us in any way? And then another very recent article by Alberto Vanolo, who wrote about city branding and the way in which actually creating a very positive image of the city to the outside can cause very problematic relationship what the city doesn't want to show. So with the actual problems of the city, such as homelessness, for example, which is very unwanted in a city who wants to have a beautiful image presented to the outer world. And so I think it's a little bit, you know, it gives you a little bit of an idea that what we want to achieve with these articles and like and the mixing of different perspectives is that we want to try to find the human value again in the discourse on urbanism and city development that is very much dominated, we think, with the capital value, and that somehow where amateurism as an attitude for us comes in handy is that we think that this deep connection and enthusiasm and engagement presents a different set of values that we think can create somehow a positive counterbalance to what we think is a little bit too dominant. And and this is actually something that is very important to us, and I want to take the time to read this quote out loud. Is a quote by Alain Badiou, and it explains exactly this relation between amateurism and how love connects as to politics. So he said that real politics is to engage to resolve problems within a collective with enthusiasm. It's not simply to delegate problems to the professionals. Love is like politics in that it's not a professional affair. There are no professionals in love, and there are none in real politics. So where we think it brings us is that we can hopefully navigate somehow from cities being purely seen as investment machines to something that is more a place of habitation, and that the value of that becomes more important perhaps than the capital value. And that cities are not seen as places that you need a key to, that it's an enclosed space that perhaps one day a celebrity, in this case Drake, receives a key to the city to boast himself as a proud citizen. But we should see cities as something that is more inclusive, where instead of the key to the city, we have the right to the city. And it's not that only selected people have the key to the city, that we all have the right to the city. And in that case, that we should not only see it as an individual right to the city, but we should see it as a collective right to the city. So as in this case, we definitely strongly disagree with Margaret Thatcher that there is no such thing as society and we're all independent individuals. We strongly believe in society, and we think that only in cases as this one in Tahrir Square, where protesters work together to protect the ones that want to pray in that moment, they, through working together, actually create the space and define the space and define what the space is for at that very moment. And here I want to refer just really briefly to the topic of this festival, which is resilience, which is where I think exactly we don't want to see resilience as something that is a matter of management, as I think was brilliantly captured in this photo by Candy Chang, that, stop calling me resilient, because every time you say, oh, they are resilient, that means you can do something to me. I'm not resilient. So it's not, resilience is not a process that we can become a stronghold and we can allow ourselves to be kicked as many times as possible because we're strong, and whatever happens to us, we will stand up again and we'll say, hit me again, I can take it. It's more the kind of resilience that, because if something happens, we are all together and we can find ways to help each other out. And but we should not take a disaster as a starting point, as something that we by definition should accept. It's more that if it happens and if we have a strong bond with each other and with the places where we live, we can actually respond to it better. And to illustrate that, I want to briefly refer to an example that Suketu Mehta, who is an author of Maximum City, Bombay Lost and Found, gave recently in a lecture at LSE Cities, together with Richard Sennett, which is also online, and I strongly urge you to watch it. He gave this beautiful example of a situation when you're trying to get on a train on a Monday morning to get to work when you're in Bombay. And the situation is basically that the train is leaving, and then the passengers see someone who is running on the platform that want to get on that train, and they know that this person will be late for work if they don't catch that train. And there will always be a hand reaching out to help that person get on the train, because they know what it means if you're late for work. Maybe you will lose your job, or maybe your boss will yell at you, depends on how good the boss is. But the point is that the train is already packed and there is virtually no space for yet another passenger. So it's not like it's a matter of comfort, but the people make the space out of compassion and the understanding for the other space, for the other person. And that's a form of resilience where there is a certain space for flexibility and adjustment. But it's a different one than the technical one. And so in that sense, that's what we're trying to say. It's not the competition that matters in terms of like who gets a better image, who becomes higher in the ranking. It's more that we should see the city as something that is a common resource, that is something that that we can decide about together. And as Bruno Latour says, that it's not something that we delegate to experts, or that we say, you know, like, it's not my field of expertise. As my friend said, it's something that it's a matter of concern of all of us. And just to briefly illustrate this, why it's a matter of all of us, because, for example, in Europe currently we have enough vacant homes, not buildings in general, not offices, factories and so on, vacant homes. They can house a homeless population of Europe twice over. It's of course not happening, and it could be seen as a technical problem, but it is actually a political problem, and it won't change if it's not addressed politically. And this is what I mean by a matter of concern. It's something that we can solve if we understand it, and we also act proactively, like we demand it, that it is solved. To relate it again back to media and to our practice, these are a few things that I think can be done to help to build this understanding. So one thing is to expose hypocrisy, to bring the marginalized to the light, so to show that they exist, to occupy the gray zones, and to again bring them to light in the cities, to create temporary communities, to raise awareness in general, to provide the tools for any of the above, and to actually start building the alternative. And I know that this can sound still quite abstract, and I just want to give you two examples of practices that I found really amazing, and I think that they illustrate exactly this. And one is, maybe you know it, is a project called Hypo Topia. It was realized, I think, about 1 or 2 years ago by students in Vienna, architecture students, first, second year students, so very young people, who saw on the TV the news about the bailout of Hypo Bank in Austria. It was a huge scandal. The bailout cost, I don't remember exactly the amount, but I think it was 19 billion euros. And they couldn't possibly comprehend what this amount of money means. So they asked themselves the question, okay, so what could you do for that money? Could you build a city for that money? And it turns out they could build a city, and they decided to actually design a city, build a model of it. And it was not only the built infrastructure that they thought of all of the services that were needed to house this amount of people in the city. So also the school, the administration, everything that you can think of. And that allowed them to understand the scale of the national loss that was going almost unnoticed, just briefly commented on the news. So what they did is they designed the city, they created a model of it, and they exhibited it in like one of the most important public spaces in Vienna, in Karlsplatz, which generated a lot of public discussion, and that really brought to light the scale of what happened and allowed people to understand what it meant. And another example that I really like is this artist, a landscape artist from Alberta, who was bothered by a very powerful energy company from Canada that wanted to dig in his land to bring in some gas pipes from place A to B. He didn't want to sell his land to let the gas pipes be built, but of course it was very difficult to fight as an individual with a very powerful company. So, but he was a smart guy, so he came up with an idea. He said, I'm a land artist. I'm going to build a piece of art in this land, which is going to raise the land value, which is maybe going to drive the company away, because maybe it's going to push the price of the land higher than what they would want to pay. So he did that, but of course that did not completely discourage the company. So then he came up with a second idea. He thought, I'm going to register myself as a consultant. And so that every time the company wants to talk to me, they will have to pay me rather high fee to be able to negotiate. And this was the way that actually he managed to make them talk less to him. And he kept the land and he kept the artwork. And it's actually quite an interesting destination. If you're ever in Alberta, you can go see the artwork. It's still there. But this is exactly the, but he's an artist and he's quite smart, and not everybody has this advantage. But his story, I think, illustrates very well how, as an individual, you can be powerful if you are informed. And if people know about similar examples, that can also inspire them to act maybe not the same, but in a similar way. And so that is an illustration of how we think we should learn cities anew, not as masters, but as amateurs. And to let you understand a bit how we see each other, like as this publishing and research platform, it's this is a Turing machine, which was the machine built during the Second World War that helped to break Enigma. And it was based on a number of connections and input that would help to decipher the code. And we see our role more as this kind of connector that doesn't give you the exact answers, but maybe through these connections, something powerful can happen in the end. And that also brings us to the point how we value collaboration a lot. And it's not that we want to be amateur cities as a magazine, and that's why we call ourselves a platform, because we want to work with other people and we want to enable these connections. We want to find questions and links and direct the people that we think could create something powerful together to get to know each other and to have the knowledge as an available resource also to have the understanding. But everybody who has ever worked in collaboration with people, so from different disciplines, different countries, they know that it can be very difficult actually to communicate. So as in the story of Babel, if we don't speak the same language, we cannot build something together. And that brings me to the project that we're working on right now that I mentioned in the very beginning, which is called Urgent City, towards the new vocabulary of terms. And we just started the very first part of it, where we want to understand the different words that people use when they talk about cities and urban challenges. And we just launched this open call. So if you're interested, please go and fill out the form, as my friend didn't do. And where this is leading us is, so on the in the first stage, we want to try to create a common understanding of these problems that can allow to have a discussion on urban environment, not only between architects and urbanists, but also across different disciplines. And in November, we want to bring them all together in a conference where we want to discuss these problems all together. So if any of you go to Florence in November, please visit us. And this platform that we want to create in Florence is also a place where we want to bring together a lot of different people who care about their environment and bring their knowledge together and create an actual discussion and not only a set of presentations, because the other part which we value a lot about amateurs is the fact that they can very freely ask what we can consider stupid questions, because we think that there, you know, when you think that you know something very well, sometimes you will restrain yourself from asking a question because you think it's obvious. But actually asking why the sky is blue led to a very important scientific discovery. And we think that there's no such a thing as stupid questions, but they actually can lead to innovation. And I just want to close with a reflection that I had on a talk by Douglas Copeland, that if anyone is quite an expert on future, even though he doesn't see himself as such, he said an anecdote about when he was in art school, they had this teacher that was teaching typography, and he was quite a grumpy guy, and he said, like, I don't know, I'm teaching this, typography is dead. And that was in the 60s, right before Apple computers were created, that just redefined the whole idea of typography and how we use it. And Douglas Copeland said that it made him think that perhaps that means that if somebody says something and it's dead, that means that it's maybe just about to boom and reinvent itself. And that's in a way what I hope we could refer to the crisis of democracy that I was mentioning before, and that we can build this parallel with the problem of urban development and the engagement of citizens in creating their cities. So I hope that that you actually have some burning questions, and that we can have a discussion. I don't know how we are with time. No, really, 5 minutes. So hopefully a little bit. And thanks a lot.